The Good Garbage podcast has been brought to you by Pakka. Pakka has been creating solutions in the food packaging, carry, and service space. Pakka utilizes sugarcane residue and upcycles it into amazing products. Their latest offering is a compostable, flexible packaging solution for the chocolate and confectionery industry. The products are available in the Indian subcontinent and in North America now. Pakka is also building an end-to-end solutions for customers in the food service and delivery space. For any query, do email at connect@pakka.com, and Pakka is Pakka. Hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question: what is good garbage? In life, we meet some people with such clarity of thought and with the gumption of speaking their minds that we are just blown away and we want to listen to them and learn. Sian Sutherland, the co-founder of Plastic Planet and PlasticFree.com, is definitely one such person. We were at Rethinking Materials together last year but did not manage to connect. And then Alex, our producer, met her at a plastic summit in Portugal and was excited to have her on the show. Sian and I had so much to talk about that we recorded twice. This will be part one of the conversation that focuses more on her eclectic journey to what she does and shines a lot of light on the reality of plastics and the ideas around the myth of recycling. Enjoy this conversation and then join us in a couple of weeks for the next one. Hello. I'm so happy to have Sian Sutherland, the co-founder of Plastic Planet and PlasticFree.com. But of course, those are just a couple of things that are mentioned here. Sian wears so many hats, and I'm so excited to dig into all of those. Thank you so much, Sian, for being on the show.
Well, thank you, Ved. It's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Great. I'm actually going to start with things where we couldn't find much when we were doing our research, which is your growing up years. Tell us more about where you grew up, and especially if there were influences then. I know that you talk about your later time when you took products out and that kind of hit you, but were there influences in your earlier life where you got more aligned with nature, and how where you grew up and what was that like?
So yeah, my early years are probably fairly unexceptional in every way. So I'm one of four kids. I have three brothers. I'm right in the middle, very close to my brothers. Both our parents are now gone. God bless them. But we had a wonderful childhood, absolutely wonderful childhood, at a time where you came home from school and then you grabbed a piece of toast and then you went out and you played until your mum called you in for tea. And you made camps and you did naughty things and you pretended to run away, and then your mum and dad would go out and they'd get a call saying, all four of your kids seem to be on the roof of your house. Is this right? But I think I had a really marvelous childhood. It wasn't a rich childhood. We didn't travel. I didn't go abroad until my teens, really. But we knew the value of things. So my father was a doctor and my mother was a primary school teacher. Interesting story that before she met my dad, she was a Roman Catholic nun. So you can imagine her sense of faith and service was something, and her appreciation and her joy of really simple things and of her knowledge that love is all that matters was something that I think is very, very ingrained in all four of her children and probably manifests in different ways. Yeah.
Your dad, sorry, I'm interrupting, but your dad must be something to take her away from being a Catholic nun.
Yeah, well, I don't think she doesn't say he was the reason, but definitely he was the result. At the end of it, he was the result. And also, of course, my dad being a doctor, never doing any private medicine. He was a dedicated NHS GP, so he was there. He was a very popular doctor, and I think again, having two middle class parents who had fought their way up, and we lived in one house for the majority of my childhood, and it was a simple but wonderful life where I think we focused on the things that matter. And I know that our birthdays and our Christmas celebrations, and we may not have been the most wealthy people that we knew, but we felt we had everything. And we had each other, and there was a wonderful sense of community where I grew up, just outside London. And then, of course, like many teenagers, I discovered drink and boys and music. And then pretty soon, I wanted to come and work up in London. And that's how I ended up. My very first job was actually in London, was in advertising, in those heady days of advertising, which is all about long lunches and big egos and even bigger budgets. And so it was quite a wonderful time, really, to come and be part of the Soho scene, and which I really enjoyed. So that was in the 80s. And then I was 25, working in advertising, when I realized the company was expanding rapidly. It was going to become one of the bigger agencies. And I realized I'm not a big company person. I'm a small team person. I enjoy that feeling of being, a valuable cog in a much smaller vehicle. And I decided then that I would leave and I would set up my first business. And crazily, I don't know why, I decided that I would open a restaurant in Soho in London. And if you know the lack of experience I had at every single level, other than sitting on the other side of the table and enjoying it, you'll know how extraordinary it was. I'd never waited. I'd never lifted a plate. I wasn't a great cook. None of those things. But I loved the idea of building a team to give people a really amazing experience that was completely democratic, that whoever you were, you could go and you could have this wonderful evening and create your own personal memories over good food and good wine. And then we opened that restaurant in 2087. Would that be right? Yes, 2080. Sorry, 1987. 1987. With my
Not yet
restaurant
at
manager.
2087. We'll get
Yeah, no,
there.
hello. Maths, just so good at it. We opened that restaurant then, and this was before the internet. So it was way before you could you could get that kind of social media attention. But in the first 3 days, we had the editor of the Good Food Guide come in. We had Faye Mashler from the Evening Standard, and they were the gods at that time. They were the restaurant critics. They could make or break your restaurant. I had this incredible young team, really good chef who was previously the premier sous chef at the Savoy, amazing restaurant manager who'd done the Savoy 5-year training course, who is now my husband of 32 years. And that's a whole other story. And we won a Michelin star in our first year. And the winning of that star was incredible. And it really brought the Michelin star back to Soho at a time that new British cuisine was just starting. So it was an incredible thing, but it was also a nightmare, a poison chalice. Because once you have one star, then it's all about how do you keep it or how do you get another. It's definitely not how do you give it back. So you've created really a monster that you need to keep feeding. So the next 5 years, we ran that restaurant and we went through one of the wars, the Gulf War, and all the Americans stopped traveling. So that was a disaster for restaurants. And I have to say, of all the things I've done in my entrepreneurial career, running a restaurant was the one I learned most. Because you learn, every day is a new business presentation. It's a massive amount about running a team. There's, you can do well one day and then you have a half empty restaurant the next day because there's a train strike and there is nothing you can do about it, and that's your profit disappeared. So it's an incredibly sensitive, volatile business system. And that kind of mercurial existence I loved and I hated. And there were many times I'd lock the door of that restaurant in Soho in Lexington Street and think, I don't care if this burns down overnight. I don't ever want to come back again. And other days where I would just think, I've probably got the best job in the world. And there was rarely a middle ground in that. And then married my restaurant manager, and anyone who works with their partner hats off to them because I don't know how you do that. I think that's a really difficult thing to do.
My wife tells me very clearly that I'll never work for you. I can help you in different things, but there is no for you. Can I just halt there a little bit because there's so much to unpack there. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so just stepping back a little bit, I see this girl that who comes into London from outside London, and do you study at all after that? Do you do a university degree and stuff, or do you just go into business straight away?
I went straight into business. So, I
Wow.
started work aged 18. And
How did the
my
doctor
two
father feel about that?
heavily disappointed. He grew up on a council estate in Liverpool. He got a scholarship to Oxford. He studied classics. I mean, like Magdalen College was very, very important to him. And he was very keen. My two older brothers didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge. He was very keen that I would do that. But as I said, I discovered drink and music and boys, and that's all I can say.
Yeah.
And I went from this high achiever to just skimming through, doing the least I could possibly do, and
Oh
somehow getting,
man.
or kind of
Yeah.
getting away with
Yeah.
it. And so I
Yeah.
didn't go to university in the end. I went straight into work, and I had
Yeah.
zero regrets for that. Both my sons did go to university, and I've loved seeing that.
But I see this wonderful streak of creativity in you, right? You must have found that somewhere that, okay, I want, or it was inherent and you knew it, and that took you to advertising. That's my presumption. So tell me a little more about that creative streak. Where did that come from? What was that about? What made you excel in a field like advertising without a university degree? And you know how, and clearly you did well there. So how did that work out, and what was it in you that drove that?
Well, interestingly, even though I was in advertising, I was not on the creative side. And for me, I think the most creative people in the world are entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs create something out of nothing, something that didn't exist. They don't just make something desirable. They don't just create beautiful artists out of nothing. So that's of course ultimately creative. But it's a very for me the creation of business is highly underestimated. And so I always look at the entrepreneurs as the most creative people you could possibly have. Because also as an entrepreneur, not only do you have to ride that roller coaster, but your job is never done. You can never do enough. And it is that relentless roller coaster. But in my childhood and in my upbringing, there is not an entrepreneurial streak in my family. My father, obviously NHS his entire life, my mother being a teacher, so she's in a system. My two elder brothers, they worked for either for the civil service or the NHS. So there was no one who was really forging that path of the entrepreneur. So I think particularly from my dad, he could never quite understand what I did because it was alien to him that you could just create a business out of nothing. Where do you learn those skills? And you don't learn those skills. You just do them and you learn by doing. And that's what I love about the world of business really is it is highly creative, but whatever career you do, and I've now had many career iterations, I am a serial reinventor. It's all the same shit. It's all the same common sense. And that's
Yeah.
what I find that
Yeah.
quite often you will have. And, here I was opening a restaurant with no experience, trying to attract talent, find a building, raise the money. 25 years old, never done this before in my life, and you just put one foot in front of the other and you just have a level of self-belief. My one thing that I have, if there's any superpower, it's radical naivety because I don't know the reasons why not. I want to know them. It's like, don't tell me.
Yeah.
And through everything I've done, when people will point out to me, well, that's not quite how it's done. I launched a skincare brand. I co-founded that, ran that for 11 years,
Yeah.
had no experience in skincare, no experience in running a skincare brand, no experience in manufacturing in the US, opening retail in the US, no experience in that. But if you think of it always from the place of what would I like to be sold? How would I like to be spoken to? What's the experience I would like to have in a restaurant? That's a great place to start rather than what's the most profitable thing that I can spend my time on. And I guess the common thread between everything I've done has always been wanting to create incredible connections with your customers, your community, your team, that you're simply trying to create this great bond and make somebody feel better about themselves in any particular way.
Yeah, and there's clearly a chain of grit and relentlessness that is visible through this, and what you do now. The couple of things that came to my mind, as you said, ultimately all businesses are the same. My father, who was a great entrepreneur, he taught me this, that he said exactly the same words. Ultimately it's all the same. You kind of take something, you add value to it, and you pass it on. You sell
Mm.
it. Whatever it is. He said it could even be a creative pursuit like acting. You're taking a character, you're creating more, adding more value to it, and then projecting it. Or it could be a product. The second thing that came to my mind as you were talking about naivety was that there's somebody else who said, if you draw a grid of skills on one side and knowledge on another, and there'll be the high skill, low knowledge on one side, which will be a good craftsperson. There will be the high knowledge and low skill, which would be like an expert in the area, or somebody who really knows stuff. And then there will be the high skill and high knowledge, and that could be the expert, and the high knowledge and lower skill could be maybe a consultant and somebody who knows. But there's that grid in the bottom, which is low skill and low knowledge, and that's where all the entrepreneurs sit. But they try to take it towards high skill and high knowledge, and that's the trajectory we are on, continuously, which is so visible when we look at you. And I'm glad that you also mentioned the brand that you created, the Mama Mio skincare. And I actually wanted to dive there next, because that's where the epiphany happened, right, with packaging. So let's talk a
Mhm.
little more about that and how that came along.
So I left the restaurant to set up a brand design agency, went through my baby making years, as did my co-founder, Kathy. And we, to be honest, made the products for ourselves. We did a lot of work in health and beauty, and we made the products to help us through that whole 9 month stretch. And then, of course, your clients are never quite brave enough. You always think, why don't this should be an entire brand in itself? Nobody had ever put those words pregnancy and skincare together before, which now sounds bonkers because, I don't know, aging, acne creams, all of those things, they're one thing to address, but you try putting 30 inches on your tummy in 40 weeks and losing it. And that is the biggest skincare challenge your skin is ever going to have. And there is nothing for you. So we created products for ourselves. And then, long story short, after many years, decided there was a niche in the market and we launched a brand. And we got funding from various investment banks, and we launched in the US. And I ran that brand, and it was an extraordinary, wonderful experience for me because unlike anti-aging creams where it's all about fighting a negative, when you're working with pregnant women, they're making a miracle. They're growing another human being in their tummy, and what they want is that nurturing little hug along that journey, that this product is safe, that you are there for them, that you understand how they're feeling, how they're going to feel on the other end of it. So that was a wonderful experience for me of building that brand. So we grew that to 14 countries. But as you can imagine, largely built on plastic. So I cannot tell you how many millions of plastic bottles I have personally been responsible for pumping out into the environment. And then it was as we were exiting that brand that I was asked to consult the Hong Kong board, who were making the first feature documentary about plastic and the ocean. I knew nothing. So that was my personal epiphany of realizing, talking to the marine biologists and the scientists and everybody in between, of realizing what we have done to our planet, and then increasingly what we have done to every living thing on the planet, and now fully recognizing what we do to ourselves as human beings with this addiction to this incredible but toxic and indestructible material. And as I exited the skincare brand, I wondered, is there, what should I do? Should I go and consult for other entrepreneurs? Can I be helpful or additive in some way? And as I mentioned, I had this whole thing of second curving pretty much every 7 years of doing something completely different. So I was definitely ready for a new challenge, but the environmental space was alien to me. I'm from the world of business, but I couldn't leave the plastic crisis alone. And I wondered if there was a way that myself and my amazing co-founder, Frederica Magnuson, if we could create a different kind of organization that was pro-business, pro-solution, a pro-activist really, that could work with business, lobby governments, try and create the right laws and policies and fiscal motivation that industry change faster, but would exist for one reason, and that is to ignite and inspire the world to turn off the plastic tap. So nothing to do with beach cleans, nothing to do with recycling. That's a whole other story that I'm sure we will touch. But really to work collaboratively with industry, because as an entrepreneur, I believe in the power of industry and the power of business as a tool for good and a tool of change. And here we are, 2024, we do not have time to reinvent capitalism. We don't have time to reinvent the way that our economic model largely works. So what we have to do is work with the systems that we have and motivate them to change faster. So that's when we launched A Plastic Planet. Busy, just conceived in a print shop in Notting Hill Gate, where we were about to do a screening of the documentary A Plastic Ocean, and having to bribe people to go there, because who wants to go see a film about plastic in the ocean? That sounds like a downer. And then we launched with this very simple idea of asking supermarkets to give us just one aisle, a plastic-free aisle, that we would have the choice to shop without plastic. And we met with all the supermarket bosses. Of course, nobody was interested. And then Blue Planet 2 happened. Infamously, Blue Planet 2 happened. And the world woke up. And the internet slowed down in China with 80 million people watching that one episode. And the rest is kind of history, isn't it? Of us all gradually feeling that pang of guilt every time we place a piece of plastic packaging in our shopping trolley. And here we are in 2024 with very little change.
Yeah, yeah. Yep, and we have a lot to talk about with all of that. But just again, just digging a little deeper. So this one, I'm going to put in a couple of questions here. One is, why did they invite you to Hong Kong? Because you were in the skincare brand which you had exited. And the second, let's add on to that. How did Frederica and you meet, and how did this whole idea emerge that this is what we like? Of course you knew by then you wanted to do something about it, but this is how we are going to go about it. How did that emerge? So if you can unpack those two a little bit.
Yes. So I knew the Plastic Ocean documentary makers in Hong Kong through Frederica, through Fred Magnuson, who I had known on and off really as a friend for 10 years, but not super well. And then we started to work together to see if we could help them seek distribution, gain awareness, really have some screening so that the right people saw it, who could really instigate some kind of change within their business, within their whole organizations. And so that's how I got involved, not because I had a skill set in film production, but because I understood the world of business and I understood the world of communications and messaging. And really, I'm a marketeer, and I think marketing has a very bad reputation. And yet marketing is everything. Now I say I used to sell stuff and I sell change, but I'm still in the world of marketing, and I'm selling a dream of a different kind of future, rather than the inevitable plastic waste-ridden future that we're looking at right now. But it's still a form of marketing. And it was in the print shop in Notting Hill, where we'd said to the Plastic Oceans Foundation in Hong Kong, people are about to come and see this film. They're going to feel scared and guilty and angry. Their eyes are going to be wide open. Luckily, we had David Attenborough coming to that screening himself. So he was a bit of a draw. If nobody was interested in the film, who doesn't want to sit near the legend that is David Attenborough? And then we said to them, so what's the takeaway for these people? And they said, we've got this little leaflet about the 3 R's. And we were in that print shop looking at this leaflet, and I just turned to Fred and said, it's kind of bullshit. None of this, we've been talking about the 3 R's for how long? And certainly recycle, we know, is an absolute chimera, but in the world of plastic. And we've got to do better than this. And what I've always been very conscious of is, this is going to sound a bit radical. Be prepared. I don't like the model of charity in business. I don't understand how we have allowed a model to evolve in our economic world where business, at the behest of everything in the name of profit, maybe in our depletive, extractive, exploitative, pollutive world, they can do all of that in the name of profit. And then, out of the goodness of their hearts, their philanthropic hearts, they can hive off a little bit of that profit and give it to a charity to fix some of the harm that they have done. I don't agree with that model. So we have always insisted that A Plastic Planet is not a charity. We do not like to call ourselves an NGO. We sell change. And anybody who wants to support us in this change, of course it's a non-profit, because of course we don't make any profit. We plow everything back in to do more and more and more. But there is no official entity in the UK called a non-profit, unlike the US. But that it's one of the reasons that I feel so strongly about, no, business has to do the good. It is no longer acceptable that business does harm and then we ask someone else to fix it for us. And we choose that charity. And then we pat ourselves on the back and say, well, we give 10% to this cancer charity. And yet we're pumping out a material that potentially gives you cancer. We can't do that any longer.
Yeah, this reminds me. I was talking to our financial planner, and she talked to my wife. My wife comes from a good Christian background again, and 10% must go to charity and that sort of thing. And my financial partner, as she was kind of building this whole thing, said that, what would you like? And I actually thought about it. And I said, well, I would really like to keep investing in businesses because I think the ripple effect that'll be there from that is far greater than giving something away. And the key will be, can we find more entrepreneurs that we can
Mm-hmm.
enable? And I said, I only want to do it in the sustainability and particularly the sustainable packaging space, because that ties in with what we are trying to do. And if even 10% of them are successful, the kind of ripple effect that will have it is far greater. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. And the second thing that you mentioned is about marketing and storytelling. One of my wife again comes from the brand advertising space, but for causes. And
Mm-hmm.
her business partner wrote a couple of books, and it's all about the modern day marketeers being the shamans of
Mm-hmm.
today. What is it that you what is the story that you're going to tell will create the impact that is needed. So you're so right in saying it, but I love it that you kind of say it as it is, because so many of us sugarcoat this idea, and we'll start getting into the meat and potatoes of this conversation. So talk to us a little more about this clarity that you have around recycling, and why does it mean to you? Because there is this spiel even now, I see, even with 8-9% things being downcycled, not even recycled.
Mm-hmm.
Even with that, there is this whole idea that we'll just make it into mono layers and all will be good. So why
Mm.
is it that you are so clear that this will not work even in the future? Maybe they think that it will in the future, even if it has not now. So talk to us a little more about that whole idea of recycling and what it really is.
When I started in this space, so some 8, 9 years ago, and if people had said to me, recycled polymers are better than virgin polymers, I probably would have said, yes, I agree. I now fundamentally disagree. In fact, I think they're almost worse. And so when we say recycling, obviously I am talking about recycling of plastic. I'm not talking about recycling of aluminium and other metals and paper and card and glass. God bless them. Fill your boots and recycle away, because there is a viable, commercially sound infrastructure that is handling that. But we have to wake up to the fact that plastic recycling was invented by the plastics industry. It is a chimera. It is a placebo pill that we have been swallowing for decades. And when I talk to people who are in either the textile space, like a company called Mover, based in Switzerland, and they're trying to create plastic-free sportswear to prove that it can be done, and so many other companies that are trying to really demonstrate that 100% eradication of plastic in their supply chain can happen. And I say, what is your biggest competition? They will all say the myth of recycling plastic, because we still believe that, imagine this is a plastic cup, but surely, Sian, it is better that I put this in a recycling bin than not. And the answer is actually, it's better than you don't. That you don't, because we are perpetuating this myth that that's enough, that we put it in the right bin, and it's not really our responsibility whether it goes somewhere else. It's not really our responsibility whether it ends up in an incinerator with this lovely phrase, waste to energy, which is where most of our plastic goes, or in the UK's place with the fact that it goes onto a nice export container and then off it goes onto the ship to another country, often a country that has no waste management of any sort, expecting them to deal with our waste. That here our Tesco's, our Asda recycling bags are ending up in Poland or being burnt on the roadsides of Turkish villages, or the fact that we give our clothes away that are 70% now made out of plastic in the name of charity, doing, our Maria Kondo deep cleanse, letting things go, sending it to a charity shop, thinking that we're doing the right thing, and then 15 million garments a week from the UK alone ending up in one village in Ghana. Most of it plastic, most of it considered waste, therefore being burnt in someone else's country with the toxicity that that creates. And that's why I am so fundamentally against recycling plastic, is there is no infrastructure of note. Trust me, if Coca-Cola wanted their 120 billion plastic bottles back, they would have built a recycling infrastructure. They've got the money. They've got global footprint. They can build it wherever they like, and they can be using recycled polymers right now. The reason they don't is because it's an inferior material. It was never created to be recycled many, many times. So even if you recycle it once and it has another slightly inferior life, certainly as a bottle, it will have had virgin polymer added to it. But we've perpetuated this myth. Meanwhile, we haven't turned the tap off in any way. We're focusing on the wrong end of the pipe. We're focusing on the waste rather than on production. And this has been the deflection of the fossil fuel industry, the plastics industry for decades now, of keep the public, keep the politicians focused on the waste. Let's talk about plastic as pollution, marine litter. This is a waste problem. It is not a waste problem. It's a design problem. It's a production problem. It is a tap problem. And that's where we need to address it. So this entire myth of recycling, there are no recycling fairies. It is not happening. In fact, global recycling rates are going down. The other reason, fundamentally, that I'm sure we will get onto is because of the chemicals within plastic. And if you know that some of the plastics that we make, up to 40% of the weight of those plastics is the chemicals that we add to give plastic its extraordinary qualities of being rigid like this or flexible like saran wrap, cling film, all of those things, they've had a number of chemicals added to give it those extraordinary properties. When you recycle those plastics, those chemicals do not disappear. They compound up. We use 16,000 chemicals to make all our different kinds of plastics. A tiny, tiny percent, 6%, have been tested for the impact on human health. So, and we know that of those 16,000, at least 4,000 of them are toxic to human health. Many of them are on the European Register of Chemicals for Extreme Concern. So the fact that we are recycling something that we know that is a fundamentally unhealthy material for human beings, let alone the environment, makes you ask that question of, so what other poisons do we recycle? Do we insist on trying to give a second life? Arsenic? I don't know, belladonna, rat poison, any of those things. Of course we don't. We understand they are toxic materials. We treat them with respect. We use them only where we absolutely have to. And yet with plastic, we don't do that. And because we created last year, we launched the Plastic Health Council, which represents the most expert, the bravest, decades of experience of scientists who have very deep research in the impact of endocrine disrupting chemicals on human health. And that is in fertility, cancer, autoimmune disease, heart disease. Plastic, as we know, is now everywhere in our bodies. It's in our brains, it's in our placenta, it's in our unborn babies. A report out this week saying every human testicle contains microplastics. So, Ved, are you sitting comfortably? We have to be very
I saw
careful.
that.
Yeah, we have to be so careful of these things. And yet somehow this incredible material has escaped global regulation for 100 years. I don't know how that's happened. And it shows the
Yeah.
power of the fossil fuel industry. Because this, of course, is the soft landing. It's plan B for the fossil fuel industry. As we decrease our demand for fossil fuels for energy, they hope that we will increase our demand with our developing countries, particularly for plastic. So I think when Trump was in power, he greenlit, not red lit, he greenlit 42 new polymer cracking facilities in Texas alone. So there is an enormous amount of plastic about to hit the market. And we need to be aware of this. We cannot afford to treble plastic production, which is what is forecast by mid-century, when we know
Yeah.
the impact that it has on our planet. So for all of those reasons, compounded, a long answer to a simple question. So why don't you agree with plastic recycling, Sian? That's the reason why. Number one, the system isn't there. It is never invented to be recycled. And number two, the fact that it is a mixture of chemicals. It is not on the periodic table. It is not inert. It is a mixture of chemicals. Many of them are toxic, and we compound them up as we recycle.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, early on, one of the realizations that I had, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it'll combine, is that I came from the pulp and paper industry, and I found a different story, similar to plastic. But what was happening was there was this whole spiel being sold on recycled paper as well. And what I saw was amazing, Sean. All the waste paper was being collected in places like United States in particular. They were being shipped across the world to
Mm-hmm.
China, India, Vietnam, Malaysia. It was mixed office waste typically. That was the biggest amount. It would ship to a port, and in India, it's a relatively large country. It would be shipped, 1,000 kilometers inwards. Similar energy as modifying a virgin material would be used to kind of produce much lower quality paper. Only 50% would be recovered and it would be shipped all the way back with a recycle label on it, right? So I can see the benefit of that compared to a social forestry model, for example. Not that that is great,
Mm-hmm.
that has its own challenges with monoculture and stuff like that, but I was amazed that this whole idea was being spawned. But at least in that case, there was a clear end of life, as in it would get out. The if it was put somewhere, it would disintegrate. And that's the challenge that I have always found with people talking about recycling, is that ultimately there has to be an out. What is that out? Okay, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe everybody's right. Maybe it'll keep getting downcycled, maybe not one time, as you said, maybe 10 times, right? But even then, you have that, black bag because nobody wants to know what is in there. So they just put black dye. And that again has its own challenges, putting black dye. But okay, you create something like a black container, a black dye, you can rest assured that's not going anywhere. And what happens
Mm-hmm.
then? It has to be, it has to come out. My next question, adjacencies here, is that you talked about plastic in general. How do you, as a person who's so invested in this, see single use plastics? And if we focus particularly on, and most of these single use are what, 12 to 15 minutes of average usage? How does
Mm-hmm.
that affect you, and how do you see single use in particular?
Get ready for another controversial thought. Um, I I know
Go
we
for
always
it.
talk about there's something like people say between 40 and 50% of plastic is used for single use items. However, if plastic exists for centuries, if this little iPod case is never going to become another thing, and the chances are it won't, then why is this not single use? It's only ever going to be an iPod case. If 9% of plastic is recycled globally, then why isn't 91% of plastic considered single use? Because it's only ever been one thing. So who dictated the number of minutes, hours, days, months that a thing has to be used for it to not be single use? And I know, you talk about 11 minutes, which is obviously the bag, the straw, the paper cup, the water bottle, all of those things. And those are pernicious enough. But then I would say most of the things that we wear, let's look at one of my favorite ones is the world of trainers, sneakers. So you look at a sneaker, majority of that sneaker is made out of plastic. It is never going to be recycled. We make 50 billion sneakers every single year, 50 billion sneakers for a population of 8 billion every single year. And so many of them are going to end up in landfill. We know where they're all going to end up. And you look at that and just think, why are they not considered single use, number one? And then the other thing that's always interesting to me is to look at the carbon footprint of the sneaker industry. Because it's so often we look at plastic as this thing where it's light on carbon, but there's this unfortunate downside, which is pollution. Perhaps the chemicals and the health impact, but definitely pollution, because that makes us feel bad. But ultimately, there will always be this pushback, but it's light on carbon. The sneaker industry accounts for 1.4% of the global carbon budget every single year. Doesn't sound like too much. You compare that to aviation, 2.5%. Everybody feels guilty about taking flights. You're always asked when you book a flight, do you want to offset your carbon? You don't get that when you buy a pair of trainers, do you? And it's extraordinary to me how we include certain things, like aviation is the bad boy of the carbon industry. And then you look at something like sneakers, never ever mentioned. And yet more than half the footprint of aviation for greenhouse gas emissions. So it's always extraordinary to me, this whole thing about single use. And of course, we shouldn't be using a material that will last for thousands of years for a carrier bag. How bonkers is that? That would mean that, our King Charles would be using the same bags as Henry VIII used, stashed under the sink in Windsor Castle. That's the length of plastic. So when we buy a bag for life, remember, that's the life of plastic. And really, who knows what happens after that 500 years? We haven't had plastic that long. So I really push against this little phrase of single use, because if we think that single use is the extent of the problem, and 70% of our clothing is now made out of polyester, and an average number of times an item of clothing is worn is 7, then why is clothing often not considered single use? And then what happens to it? So we've got to be broader. We like to pigeonhole things so easily. It's about a straw, ban straws. Plastic pollution is not caused by straws. It's not even caused by bags. Some vast percentage, I think it's 35% of the microfibers in the ocean are simply by us washing our clothes. So we need to have a much bigger picture of where is all of this coming from. The fact that we're inhaling plastic. It is not just about these notional little items that we're picking off one by one in the EU Single-Use Plastics Directive that obviously the UK is now following by the letter. We have to be more broad brush. We've got to be a lot more ambitious. And through being ambitious and banning these things, we give business certainty. And business will not innovate. And who can blame them? Because plastic is the easy status quo, and it's cheap. And unless somebody gives me a better alternative, why would I change? They have to be banned. It's only when we introduce policy, fiscal regulation. These are the things that are going to create that playing field for industry to then innovate. And my final point on this is I rail against also the fact that we think this is about reversing. It's about going back to the 50s. When people say, oh yeah, I use a glass milk bottle now. It's like the milk truck from the 1950s. I'm like, no, I don't want you to think that way. I want you to think, okay, plastic has been this extraordinary gateway for us to reimagine what is fundamentally a depletive, unsustainable, pollutive, single-use culture. We can create a multi-use culture. We did this, we could do this. So I want you to think about this as a gateway for us changing everything. And in doing that, I want to create a vision of how do we shop differently? Because for me, I walk into a store at the moment and it's like Jurassic Park. It's like no one got the memo. It's aisle upon aisle of coloured plastic. But also the whole experience of retail hasn't changed. So why do we even bother going to the shops when we can just click buy now and get it delivered next day? So stores need to up their game. And I think the exploration and the innovation, the reinvention of how we shop and how we have things delivered and the products and the packaging and all of these things is not a downside. It should be considered a massive springboard opportunity for us to reimagine how we shop, how we live, to eradicate single use everything, not just plastic, but everything, create a multiple use, create things that have a resonance and a weight in our hand that have a permanence, a durability, to repair, reuse, share, rent, all of those things. So yes, we can go back to those kind of appreciation of craft versus this take, make, waste, chuck it in a bin for the mythical recycling fairy to come along and do something with it. So I think that we have this opportunity right now. Yes, we can call it single use, so we can start with that. But let us quickly eradicate single use everything. And let's look to using the extraordinary skills of the creative industry to create a different way for us to live. And that's why I think the plastic crisis is such a great gateway for us to do that, because every single one of us feels a little bit bad about what we have done to the planet with plastic. We're all complicit. We have all been part of this. So we would love there to be a different way to live. So we need industry to pave the way, show us, bring it to us. Stop expecting us to do all the hard work and bring refill containers back to a store, because that's just never going to happen at scale. We've just got to take this opportunity to rethink everything about how we live. And that to me is exciting.
I couldn't agree more with you. In fact, I'm going to give you an example of a practical example, which you will appreciate for sure. So back in 2019, there was this rumor in India that the prime minister on Mahatma Gandhi's birthday on 2nd October was going to, and our prime minister is very passionate about sustainability. So it was going to ban single-use plastics at that point. And we as a company are deeply involved and invested in this space, and we come from a more utopian aim that we have to do it no matter what, and we have to create materials at scale. But what interestingly happened, Sean, was that everywhere we would go, like it could be these researchers in Europe and US, wherever we were, Nordic countries, and we would find a bunch of Indians. They were all looking at options. 2nd October comes and it doesn't happen. The announcement doesn't happen. Boom, nothing. Nobody is seen anymore. So I was just amazed, exactly what you were saying. I was just amazed at the speed of innovation that happens if a government is willing to actually take that step and then implement it, because it did
Mm-hmm.
eventually happen right after COVID 2022 or something, where there was a single use plastic ban, but not implemented well. So
Mm.
okay, somebody sneaks out a plastic bag first and sees, okay, nobody is watching me. Then they start
Yeah.
doing it regularly, and it again goes back to normalcy, so to say. And of course, there's a whole industry being affected, but you're so right. There's going to be this huge array of materials if there was more drastic action. Yeah, there may be an interim period of discomfort that might happen, but that's great. It'll churn out better ideas and products. So I
Yeah.
actually saw it with my own eyes happening, how kind of it could unfold innovation. And the second thing you said, this whole idea, you took it to Prince Charles and a king way back. I don't remember
Henry
whose
VIII.
name you
Yeah.
took, but Henry VIII, exactly. So but I keep saying that even when we are doing induction sessions for our team, I say that, okay, how long has this plastic bag been there? Has been
Mm-hmm.
invented, and typically it'll be 70, 75 years. And I said, imagine this. The first bugger still has 430 years to go. So, so that,
Yeah.
and it'll change form, but it is not going to go away. The third thing you said, which is really important again, and it totally resonates with me, and this is where your ideas are so profound. You have to solve at source. You cannot
Mm-hmm.
try and say that I'll create this and then I'm going to doctor it again to kind of get to a conclusion, and that takes me to everything. It's not just, I look at, when we look at water management in our plant, what we tend to do is use as much water as you want, take it to this common pool, and then treat it and bring it back. And I'm always questioning that first principles idea. Why don't you reduce it right there on that paper machine, on that pulp mill? Just circulate it right there. Don't take it all the way to effluent treatment and bring it back. and don't mix it up. So, but that's the idea here as well. But a couple of things I want to learn more from you on is that we are told that when it's heavier plastic, like you brought out that earphones or earpod case, I'm told that that's better recyclable. I don't know. I have no idea whether it is. When it's a more rigid plastic, it kind of recycles better. Is that really the case, or that's also just folklore? It will not be recycled well, because I see it as, because again, maybe my background in India, I see it as economic value or non-economic value. If
Hmm.
the product that is thrown away has economic value, which basically means some recycler will buy it, it's going to get collected really fast. There's going to be in India, there's going to be a bunch of rack pickers who are going to pick it up. For example, they'll never pick up a flexible pack, but they'll pick up all the
Yeah.
plastic bottles. So what happens to rigid plastics? Do they have more economic value, or that's not the case?
They do have more economic value, and the PET, the clear PET bottle, is the poster child of plastic recycling, because that is the one that is most valuable and it's easiest to grind up and to recycle into something. However, as you said right at the beginning, you downcycle plastic. You don't recycle plastic. It is not like aluminium, where one can become another can. One plastic bottle does not become another plastic bottle. And then the new myth really is that we can chemically recycle. Advanced recycling is now the new white hope, which is that we can reduce it down to its original constituent parts, and then we can make new polymers from those. But the problem with all of these things is the energy that it is used. So chemical recycling is very energy intensive. The yield is 10%. So for every 10 tons of plastic you put in, you'll get 1 ton out, which is unbelievably low for the energy usage. And then the other thing, of course, we keep coming back to, which is chemicals, and the fact that this is a very toxic process. So all recycling of plastic, you have to chop it up at some stage. And that chopping up, the trillions and trillions of microplastics that are created in that chopping up process, that are existing in the air forever, that are being inhaled by the people that work in those polymers, in the MRFs, the waste management sites of the MRFs, all of these things, highly toxic. So we need to be incredibly careful of thinking, yeah, rigid plastic is more recyclable. Well, once, apart from anything, this is coloured. It's white, but this is coloured. It's only clear plastic that is not printed on, that is not soiled, that is of any value to anybody. And you see those pallets, if you go to those rubbish dumps of India, of Nairobi, all of these different places, and you can see. I've been to the rubbish dumps of Chennai, and you see people living on these dumps. And one of the things that I think is the most painful to me is when you are involved in some of the conversations with brands, and they start to talk about these words, just transition, and say, yeah, but there are, communities of people that depend on this plastic waste for their living. So, we cannot take this away from them. They need the plastic. And I have been on panels at some of the UN negotiating sessions, particularly the one in Nairobi, where I'm there sitting next to somebody who is a waste picker, who will say, plastic is good. We need the plastic. We need the valuable plastic. And it makes me very sad that it is our waste that we are exporting to create these dumps. And then we have the audacity to say these people need the jobs. Shame on us that these jobs are created picking our waste to try and achieve some kind of value, because we put it in a black bin bag, as you say, the black bin bag of shame. We popped it outside. We sent it away for someone else to deal with it because we don't have the infrastructure. It ends up on a dump somewhere in the world because it's a highly dubious system. I was going to say the word corrupt, but I stopped. But I think there's a lot of underhand dark arts of the waste management industry, and it makes me very sad when I hear those words, just transition. But I tell you what was very interesting to me. I was at the United Nations Global Plastic Treaty negotiations in April in Ottawa, And they're, again, the waste pickers are represented there as they absolutely should be because they're a major part of the problem and whatever the solution is going to be. And of course, the treaty is way too focused on waste and not nearly enough focused on the tap. There's other reasons for that we'll come back to. But what was interesting to me is through the INC processes, and this is the third negotiations I've been to over the course of a year and a bit, that now they are not just talking about just transition. The waste pickers are talking about reparation. And they're talking about reparation because of the ill health of their communities who are living on our rubbish. And I thought, great, because if there is one word that is more terrifying to industry and governments than any other, it's risk. And when you hear the waste pickers talking about the incidence of cancer, of the tumors that are, now appearing in 16-year-olds who are living on this rubbish, who are touching these highly toxic materials that are laced with endocrine disrupting chemicals, and it is making them sick, then reparations are due. So I think we're in a very interesting time right now where the world is waking up, not to this physical blight on our landscape of plastic pollution, but to the irrefutable health risk of plastic at every single level, from the minute it is pulled out of the ground and the cracking factories. And there's a wonderful woman, Jo Banner, who represents the Descendants Project in Louisiana, and her frontline community who lives around the polymer manufacturers who have, some of them have a 10 times increased incidence of cancer. And none of this is any kind of coincidence. So you have communities like that all the way through to the people that are working in the MRFs, in the waste management industry, who are inhaling it, to you and me, who, there's plastic in my cup of tea, there's plastic in the air I'm breathing, we're breathing in our clothes, we're breathing in our packaging, we're breathing in our furniture. It's kind of bonkers that we're not more concerned about this, but all the way through to the very end of the chain, the end of life, the never-ending end of life for plastic, which is on these rubbish dumps. And I think the whole, in the likelihood of there being a lawsuit, probably in America, if it doesn't come out of the waste communities of somewhere like Africa or India, then probably in America, of somebody saying, I can no longer conceive a child because of the endocrine disrupting chemicals in the material that you have forced upon me. Because when people say to you, plastic it's like the new tobacco, it's the smoking of our generation. I used to think, yeah, it kind of is. And now I think, no, it's so much worse than that. Because you and I have a choice to sit next to somebody who's smoking. We have a choice if we want to go into a smoky car or a smoky bar. We have no choice if we want to inhale air. We have no choice if we want to drink water or eat food. And so there is zero choice for us to not be subjected to the chemicals and the micro and the nanoplastics and the havoc that they wreak on human health. So I think it's much, much worse than tobacco. And if you think about the lawsuits that happened around tobacco, I think we're just beginning to see the potential of what could happen around plastic. So my job really as an entrepreneur is say to industry, ding, ding, wake up guys. This is coming like a juggernaut and you are at risk if you don't move out of this material. And if you don't invest in these incredible biomaterials of the future, of which there are a myriad, we will never have another plastic. There will never be a one-shop stop where we could just add more chemicals and give it a number of different properties. Those days are gone. We went down a toxic cul-de-sac. We went down a wrong road. It is an opportunity, maybe a gift. The plastic crisis is that little tap on the shoulder for us to say, hey, you got it wrong here. And for us to be able to then pull back and finally, after 50 years of never inventing another material, because why would we? We had this miracle. Why would we bother inventing another material? So after 50 years of this hiatus of lack of innovation in materials, now we have this incredible opportunity of inventing the materials of the future. And some of them will look like the materials that we know and love already. But some of them, I think we haven't even imagined yet. And as an entrepreneur, that's where I get excited. What are them at the moment? We're in the land of the vegetarian sausage. So you want to eat vegetables, You used to eat meat, so we'll give you a sausage made out of vegetables because we haven't got the imagination to reinvent new foods yet. And we're still like that with materials. Let's think we'll give you a vegetarian kind of leather. But imagine the materials when we can start to innovate, and through the use of AI, we can actually start to manipulate at an atomic level the way that things grow. We can do it with human stem cells now, with animal stem cells. Imagine what we can start to do in the future in the world of materiality, where things don't have to have the same level of, living matter as growing a new organ. That's the area I think is super exciting. And we really shouldn't be nervous of it. We should be embracing it. And I can't wait to get there and leave this toxic, indestructible last century's economy. Let's leave that behind us. And the only thing that's holding us back is putting the money in the right place and us finally waking up to the impact on human health and the chimera of recycling plastic. And once we do that, and we realize, this has all been smoke and mirrors by the fossil fuel industry, like many other things for decades, then I think we've got this opportunity to move into a whole other paradigm shift on materials and systems, using less. It sounds exciting to me. I don't know about you.
Well, I'm right in there. So in fact, when we were preparing for this, when Alex actually met you, Alex is our podcast producer. When he met you in Portugal, and he came back, he was so excited. He said, "I have met
Oh,
somebody who speaks exactly the language that you speak and want to speak." So, and I can hear so much of that, and like I had tears in my eyes actually when you were talking about the rack pickers, because I've seen that up front. And I don't know, have
mm,
you read a beautiful book called Behind the Beautiful Forevers?
no,
If you have
I
not,
must
you
read
must
it.
too. Yeah, you must too. I can send it to you separately. But it's just the
Oh,
story of the reality of that life. We can
mm,
see it from this idea that, oh, this is their livelihood, but it's much more complex. And you mentioned it in little bit in passing. There is more corruption there than we know. It's run by
mm,
mafia, and
yeah.
even what they get is very, very little. It's a very hard existence. And the other way I've seen it in person is that we still run a lot of schools for the children
Hmm.
of the ragpicker community. And Sean, it's really interesting. And when you talk about health, that's one paradigm that we have to deal with. But it's also interesting to see, because these are mostly in India, these are mostly migratory communities. And what happens is that the children are literally subjected to can get no education because of this movement that they have to go and come back from places. But what has happened is that as few of these kids get mainstreamed, they start moving a little bit less, and they say, oh no, my
Hmm.
child is going a different trajectory. The other thing we realize, again, this is a side note, but their mathematical skills are amazing, right? Because these are kids of 4 or 5 years who are calculating all the time, what are they going to get. But that said, exactly what you talked about, it pains my heart, the lives that we are subjecting our fellow human beings to. And I'm sure
Mm,
there is a better way to do this, to kind of move beyond this. But I wanted to move a little bit. Again, I'm continuing my education through you. So so the this year you were not there at Rethink Materials, but I was on a panel, and there was this gentleman who was very proud about setting up a recycling facility. In fact, you may even know it. I don't remember exactly what the name of the organization is, but in the north of England, on recycling flexible packaging. And I kept
hmm.
trying to question him. I said, I'd love to come see it if you think that it really works, but how do you separate and what does it become? There were no clear answers, but I don't know if maybe it was the same idea. Maybe it was chemical recycling and they were doing something about it. Because again, as you combine different materials, it becomes beyond chemistry itself, it becomes so tough. So I don't know if you have insights, especially on flexible packaging, and because nobody picks it up. And what is that, and all these products in terms of the shelf life and the barriers they need, they kind of are beautifully engineered to enable that. But do you really think that can be even downcycled and how it is being done, or if you have insights on this system that is being created in the north of England?
I don't want to criticize a fellow entrepreneur in any way, but I really doubt that any flexible plastics are ending up in any kind of circular economy. They're just not. Because there is nothing circular about plastic, and try as we might to shoehorn it into a circular model, it's not invented as a circular material. We don't have those technologies. So I seriously doubt that any flexible packaging at scale is becoming anything that is useful. And the chemicals, again, I worry about because there are a lot of chemicals in flexible packaging. And if it is going anywhere near food and drink, then I double worry because we all know about the migration of those chemicals. You know, it is not an inert material, as we said. So the migration of those chemicals into the product that it contains is a very, very serious issue. The chemicals and then also the shedding of the microplastics. So it's yet again another example of the desperation of man to maintain the status quo. It's easier for us to pretend that we can recycle flexibles and get a little green tick and get a little symbol on the back of that pack, or say to the shopper, please bring back all your flexible bread bags and whatever, and your flexible packaging, and we'll recycle it for you. And I won't name the supermarket, but we did do a bit of digging on their take back scheme where the public were bothering to bring their flexibles back to go into this recycling scheme. And then we finally unpacked, so what do they become? A black bin bag. You don't get more single use than the black bin bag, as we know. So all of it was yet another greenwash bit of marketing. You know, it's just environmental marketing, and we've got to stop doing that because it means that the public will just have such a distrust. I think we have never globally had such distrust of politicians, for sure, but now of business. And that makes me sad because do you remember there was only a few years ago, people would say they actually trust brands more than they trust politicians, which is a sad statement in itself because brands don't, they're a construct. They don't even really exist. But I don't, people trust brands anymore. You know, we've swallowed the greenwash once too often. And now we don't know what to believe. So we simply just get on with our lives and feel powerless. And that, I think, is a massive problem, is that we have created a society where we think we have no control and no power. And that makes me sad. And it makes me sad that people think that they lose their humanity. They leave their humanity at the office door when they step into that threshold and they do whatever they do at work, because they have to pay the rent and the mortgage and put food on the table and all the things that we have to do, all of us. And it makes me very sad that I think a lot of people probably don't feel very good about what they do because the business model is rigged against a humane system. And that's something that I think it would be wonderful if we could all step up and be a bit more of a squeaky wheel. And when people say to me, when I talk to businesses sometimes, and they all say, so what can we all do? You know, I use a reusable cup and I take a shopping bag. I said, God bless you for doing that, but that ain't the answer. Your power is what you do at work. So your power is always in your place of business because that's where you can make the most influence. And for too long, we focused on, in the world of waste, we focus on domestic waste. And this vast percentage, which is industrial waste and business waste, none of that is really addressed. That's just slid under the carpet. People pay their taxes for it and we won't talk about it. So we are the ones within our homes trying to recycle our yogurt pots and rinsing things out, now knowing that actually it's all going to end up in some Turkish roadside being burnt. I think we realize that what you do at work is where your power is. And I hope more people are going to be able to rise up and use that power and be that squeaky wheel. Because I'm sure the higher up the chain that you get, the more you will realize there are lots of people that feel the same way. And there is something incredible when we work with industry sometimes of talking to businesses, how plastic is such a personal thing. Carbon, I don't know. I can't see it. I can't feel it. I can touch. I don't know how I'm going to impact it. But plastic, I feel guilty about every single day. There is no one else to blame. There's no plastic deniers out there. it's fixable, it's visible, it's recent. So there's something so human and personal about plastic that when you introduce plastic reduction measures and lots of things within industry, it's a great team builder. Everybody feels very passionate and proud that they're involved in these things. So it's a good example of maybe a one step on the ladder of getting your business to do more good. Plastic is a great place to start.
Yeah. Again, so many, so many questions that each time you speak, I'm like jotting down because there's just so many ideas that come to me from your thoughts. So you mentioned, and I'm going to stay with the first. There are more complex thoughts here, so I'm going to hold them for now. But on the business side that you were talking about, but looking at one of the things that you've been consistently speaking about, inferring to, and I want to learn more there. We were trying to do business in Singapore, for
Hmm.
example, where we were trying to replace their styrofoam with a molded fiber.
Hmm.
And there were absolutely no takers, Sean, because the idea was the public mindset and the government mindset. We also tried to talk to the government, was that no, 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 we want plastic because that's how our energy is made. So we'll collect these foam boxes and these single use plastics and whatever plastic. And, we are a little island and we burn that and we create energy. What I would like to understand from you is that how does that work in order, as far as I know, my very basic science or first principles, everything will change form, but ultimately
Hmm.
nothing is getting out of that ozone layer, right? And then
Mm.
what happens in this case? So what am I doing? Am I taking, like, what are they really doing? They're taking all this plastic and probably having some catalytic kind of conversion and burning it and creating energy, and probably having some sediment in the end. But
Hmm.
educate us a little more about how the waste to energy business works. And the same thing I read from Sweden, in fact, that they are even buying plastic from or waste from United Kingdom and shipping it and burning it or something. So I don't know how
Yeah.
real that is and what really happens and what happens. Can they really capture all the? And because I asked them about gases, I said, "What is really happening to the gases?" He said, "We capture it all. There's nothing going out." So is
And
that
then what?
real? Or how does it work?
And yeah, yeah, and we
Yeah, and
capture it
then
all,
what?
and the
Exactly.
toxicity and the chemicals, and then what? Because you're right, these things, they do not disappear. And I've had conversations with people in Scandinavia who, yes, are great burners. The Germans, great burners. And the reason that they are feeding so much of this plastic waste and they need more and more and more of it is because they've made the capex expenditure on building these incinerators, these waste to energy plants, is so extraordinary that they have to get the return. So this is a 20-year investment, and they will burn stuff for 20 years. It was originally considered this is a good route, and we call it waste to energy. And then we heat. I've talked to chief executives in Denmark who say, yeah, but we don't have a problem here with plastic. We heat our hospitals and our nurseries with it. So look at that story you've just told yourself. You are burning fossil fuels that were momentarily a polystyrene box or a paper, a plastic bag or a bottle or something, and then you're burning it. But fundamentally, you're burning fossil fuels. So if we can all agree that burning fossil fuels is not the sustainable way forward, and is 100% going to, increase greenhouse gas emissions, is carbon intensive, will cause the destruction of a livable planet for our kids. If we agree that, and we have to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, and I think there are very few humans now that don't think we have to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, then let's just recognize that that polystyrene box, that was a fossil fuel. It still is a fossil fuel. It has solved climate crisis, and it has momentarily been made into a box from a fossil fuel, and you're now going to burn it as a fossil fuel. And as soon as you have that realization, you think, so it's not called waste to energy. It's called fossil fuels to energy. So let's stop calling it waste. It was momentarily something else, and now you're burning it. You may as well have just taken the oil and burnt it. So it's us again. It's this little storytelling that we do for ourselves, and I'm really glad that you mentioned molded fiber because we also work with a company in Singapore who are one of the leading molded fiber manufacturers, And I think what they're doing is amazing. And they are creating beautiful molded fiber bottles, all kinds of very high end packaging. They've developed an extraordinary way of giving you a great finish. So it isn't like an egg carton, but it's still wet molded, not dry molded, which is a slower, more expensive process. So you could get economies and you can get speed and all the things that you need to deliver if you're going to compete with plastic at the same unit economics as plastic. But what I love about what they're doing is that they are not just thinking it's about trees, because you will inevitably, if you're using paper based molded fiber, then you are going to get a pushback against, are you actually destroying ancient forests? But the good thing about molded fiber is that cellulose is the most abundant material on the planet, and agricultural waste. And that could be from the sugarcane or from the gas, obviously bamboo, so many different regional areas of what is the crop, the indigenous crop of that area. There will always be agricultural waste. There will always be cellulosic fiber that we could take. And the way that I think of it is you're simply borrowing it from nature. You're not taking it from the fields when it should actually be plowed back in. You're borrowing it from nature. And if you do molded fiber in the right way, in my humble opinion, where you keep it in its nutrient form, you've taken cellulosic fiber, which is always there for the next stage of growth for nature. You bake it, you mold it, you shape it, you make it into something, but you do not chemically toxify it so that it can go back to nature still as a nutrient ready for the next stage of growth. That if we do that, then molded fiber, particularly from agri waste, is an incredible solution for when we do need single use or even multiple use. You can make it pretty rigid now. You can give it extraordinary qualities. So I think molded fiber has been a little bit stuck in the egg carton pile of thinking that it can't look premium, and I think it can look extraordinary. I think you look at some computer items, we were just talking about this, computer items that you buy, they all use molded fiber now for their packaging. And that unboxing experience is not diminished. It's elevated for me from it being plastic inserts and crinkly stuff. And now what do I do with it? And now it's a beautiful molded fiber. So let's club together and let's go back to the Singapore government and let's make that happen. Because actually everything is also about timing, isn't it? And sometimes you can just be a little bit ahead of the curve. And for sure, styrofoam containers are being banned globally. And that's because the chemicals that they contain are so toxic. And because they're often used for grab and go, for takeaway, they end up in the environment. So the fact that people are saying, oh, it's all about waste to energy, look how many of those boxes you will find discarded in the environment. So again, it's about timing, it's about innovation. One thing I would love to make sure that we talk about, because you can tell I'm very passionate about this opportunity of innovation and molded fiber being a big part of that, is the fact that we launched a year and a half ago a solutions platform called Plastic Free. And as you probably know, we work with governments to try and create policy and fiscal motivations for industry to change. We work with industry on solutions, but we became aware of this massive knowledge gap between the creatives of the world, because everything always begins with design. Even if it's a poor design, it's had that creative process at the very beginning of it. So what if we could build a platform where we ignite, educate, empower, inspire the creative community to rethink everything at the very beginning? So we fundamentally don't have any waste at the end because we've designed it out at the beginning. So we built a platform which is hosted on plasticfree.com, which is exactly that. It is this knowledge base for the creative community, for the brand owners, to give them access to the global plastic-free materials of the world. But also, because very few people want to be first, it carries thousands of case studies and proof points and education. And we have a very simple goal, which is how can we empower the creative to feel confident, to push back against that brief that says just use a recycled polymer, we'll get a green tick, to feel like they're the most confident person in the room, to really use their creative skills for good, because we live in a world where yesterday packaging equaled luxury and today packaging equals waste. And how can we tap into their visionary, maverick, amazing skills to reinvent everything systemically as well as materially, and empower them to just have access to more information, because that community are not trained for this job. And I don't think any of them feel good about making something pretty to last for minutes to end up in a bin.
And as you were talking about on the source side, I was again thinking about fossil fuels, and again, that is ultimately a limited resource. Of course, the timeline keeps moving up, but 30, 40, 50, whatever years, that's not that many. And the
Mm-hmm,
second part is again the whole challenge of how we extract them. And we don't many
mm-hmm,
times even think about that so much, how are these fossil fuels being mined, and how the energy that is spent. And then of course, polymers are a byproduct or co-product of that, earlier a waste. So all of that is another sort of set of challenges. And then you can get into further stuff about chemicals that are generated, which have all sorts of issues on land use. And all the fertilizers and stuff like that, that has another whole dimension altogether. But the one thing I do want to touch on, because we have limited time, and you've mentioned this time and again, it's part of mine, and I'm sure the listeners' education, is on this whole space of polyester. Like you said,
mm-hmm,
70% of our fabrics, and anybody, including my home, I'm very particular about what I wear, but I see I have to compromise. This thing I'm wearing right now is mostly polyester, which is I
mm-hmm,
bought it kicking and screaming because I couldn't find another one. But that said, like, what I'm told is that polyester cannot be recycled. So I want to learn a little more about that. Is that true? And what I'm also told is that when you were talking earlier about downcycling, like even the bottles that are easily downcycled, at least in my knowledge, most of them become fiber, which is mostly polyester and the microfills and whatever happens. How do you see that getting altered? And of course, in today's time, there's fast fashion, the
mm.
H&Ms of the world, and they want to take out new materials, and it's so much cheaper when you go and buy that. Any consumer is tempted to buy a $30 thing rather than $100 sweatshirt or something like that. How do you see that polyester challenge? And how does one overcome that, because customers are now used to buying a much cheaper product? How do you see that take place?
Makes me very sad, actually, as somebody who loves fashion. I love clothes. And it makes me really sad to see an industry that was really based on craft and beauty and enhancement and quality and durability and all of those qualities to now be the pollutive, depletive, exploitative, degenerative industry that it has become. And you'll know all the statistics about the amount of pollution that is from our fashion industry. But particularly when you look at fast fashion. But we also have to step back and say, a polyester fleece, whether it's from Prada or Primark, is made of the same material. It's still made of fossil fuels. It still sheds. It still probably uses dyes that are petrochemical dyes that are toxic. And even when you look at things like leather, and there is a brilliant documentary called Slay. I don't know if you've seen it, which talks about the leather industry. Shocker, absolute shocker when you look at the leather industry, and when you look at the premium brands of the world, the LVMH type brands with their beautiful solitary in the Milan window with a spotlight on it, Italian leather bag, and then you find out there is no leather that is cured and made in Italy. It is all made in these massive workshops in some of the more disadvantaged communities of the world, the poorer communities of the world, and the chemicals that are pumped out in the processes of dyeing, not just leather, but polyester and everything that we make, is really extraordinary to me. And fast fashion could not exist without polyester because of its unbelievably cheap price, its extraordinary versatility, its availability, its speed to market, all of those things. And really, we broke that system, just as we broke the system with single use. We broke the system of quality fashion, of us owning fewer things, of treasuring them, of passing them down from one generation to another, to suddenly being able to buy something for £2.50, wear it once and throw it away. And that's fundamentally where everything has gone wrong. And then you think, so what has driven that? And of course, it is all coupled with hyperconsumption, and plastic, polyester, is the enabler of hyperconsumption because it has supercharged the availability of materials so that we can make things, use them once and chuck them away. And before we had the invention of plastic in all its various forms, including polyester, that wasn't possible. There was not enough resource on the planet for us to do things in that way. It cost too much. It took too long to grow. And now we don't have any of those things that pull us back because everything is so available. And of course, plastic is the most subsidized material on the planet, from the most subsidized industry on the planet to the tune of $7 trillion by, let's drill it back, who's actually subsidizing? It's you and me, the taxpayer, the national insurance contributor, the pension schemes. It is us. So we are, again, complicit in our own future downfall. So I think fast fashion is a poster child of really where society has gone wrong, where we have lost our connection and our appreciation of quality. And it is not about price. Value is not about price. There's a wonderful woman, Veronica Bates-Casalti, that you might know, and she's an investigative journalist. And she talks a lot about you should never value something on the price that you pay. You should value it on the number of times that you wear it. And if you pay a cost per time, then suddenly you have a whole different value system. Because if you brought something beautiful that lasts for much longer, then obviously you're going to achieve far greater value.
I have so much to talk to you. So I'm going to request you for another session for sure, because we haven't even started talking about a lot of the work that you're doing. And I wanted to actually even go through the 10 principles, the 10 beliefs that you've set up. And I think each one of those is so well thought of. And I actually want to dig into each one of them. So we are going to have to do another episode. I'm so sorry, but there is so much for me to learn here. But
don't worry. Let's do that.
We'll have to do part 1 and 2. Like, I'll take this towards closure, this part, but I'm going to have a part 2 to the to our conversation. Is that, and staying with polyester. So again, tell us a little more about what happens. So the latest, I think this one or the one before, the latest National Geographic had this whole pile of stuff in Chile, for example, and it's just like, there's apparently a huge desert area that is just taken over now with clothes, the old clothes being imported from United States, and people sorting it out and maybe reusing it. Is there any real usage? Can polyester clothes be downcycled, recycled? Does anything happen to it at all? Or that is it? That is the end, and nobody's figured out what to do with it?
Again, recycling polyester is never going to be the answer. As we said earlier, every time you recycle plastic, you downcycle it. The shedding process, when you're recycling a solid plastic, but also when you're recycling a polyester, the shedding process is really extreme. So anybody who is working in a polyester recycling factory needs serious key man insurance, because they're inhaling that is coming through their skin. It is everywhere on their bodies. So this whole idea, we currently, I think, recycle 1% of our clothing globally. 1%. Imagine by some miracle we doubled that from 1% to 2%. I rest my case. It's just, we've got to stop thinking that recycling is the answer. But it never will be when we have a never-ending pipe of plastic that is virgin plastic, that is cheaper and easier for us to use, and it gives you a more quality product in the first place. Why would you bother? Other than to have a little green label to say this used to be a plastic bottle, then why would you ever bother doing any of these things when it is cheaper and easier and better quality for you to use virgin? It makes no sense. Yeah. And to give you an idea of just how mad the recycled plastic world is. When we started to talk about the plastics tax, particularly in the UK and Europe, and saying, so it will be the case that if you are using a material that is plastic and less than 30% of that material is recycled plastic, less than 30% of it, then you have to pay a tax. And there was suddenly such a demand for recycled polymer. And of course, there's not enough recycling facilities in the world, but this demand was so increased that the price of recycled polymer went up, vastly higher than virgin polymer, bonkers. And there were factories in China that were making PET bottles and then chopping them up and making recycled PET without it even leaving the factory. That's the madness of man.
Yep.
And, and the ingenuity of man. The ingenuity of man. My favorite story on this is, we talked about the straws earlier, and somebody was telling me that they were in Greece and they went to a bar and they ordered a cocktail and they got a plastic straw. And they said, whoa, hang on a minute. It was in a little paper container, but inside was a plastic straw. They said, oh, I didn't think you were allowed to sell plastic straws anymore. And the barman said, that isn't a single-use plastic straw. That's a multiple-use plastic straw. And she said, so how does that work? Do I give it back to you? Do you rinse it? Do you wash it? Do you put it back in a paper thing and sell it again? He said, no, it's yours now. You bought it. Here's the receipt. How crazy is that? So in order to continue to use a plastic straw, we now call them multiple-use plastic straw. And again, the consumer, the shopper, is left with the problem.
No, absolutely.
Part 2 coming soon.
Part 2 coming soon for sure. So, but just on closing this episode, and again, taking a cue from you, incentivization is such a double-edged sword, right? There was a part of China that had a city which got rat infested, and they started incentivizing that the number of rats you bring, we give you per rat so much money. People started breeding rats, exactly as you were saying, right? The same thing in US somewhere, there was dinosaur bones found, right? So they started incentivizing that they're going to give money per bone. So instead of, they would find big bones, they would chop it up into small pieces. So imagine losing that. So you have to be so careful because you're going to incentivize behavior by the kind of incentives you set up. So that's so, and we see it so much on the plastic side. Like we ban plastic bags, but I go to a shopping market and I think that's such a farce because you look inside that paper bag that you've gotten and it's all flexible packaging. And there's nothing that we have been talking about there. And we are so gung-ho. Oh, we don't give bags anymore. You have to buy a reusable bag or a paper bag is what you'll get. But I said, what is inside that? It's even worse than what you're trying to ban.
Yeah.
And the same thing as you talked about straw. But Sean, I know you have
it's
limited
so tokenistic.
time. Yeah, it's so tokenistic. Exactly. This has been such a fascinating conversation for me. We have to continue. And as soon as we get off air, we're going to talk about a date and we will do part 1 and part 2 because you probably know this, but I haven't even started unpacking a lot of stuff that I have in my notes. It's only page 1 that we've covered so far. And there's no more to that. But thank you so much for the work you're doing and your insights. And let us talk about a time that we can set up part 2. Thank you for being there on the show today.
I would love to do that. I can't wait. Thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you for listening to the Good Garbage Podcast. Follow us on social media to never miss an episode. Links are in the description below. I'm your host, Ved Krishna. See you next time.